Hi everyone, it's Stephanie at PayStream Advisors. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Build It and Make Sure They Come, E-Invoicing Supplier Portals that Transform AP. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these during the webcast. If we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. We do capture all questions. A copy of today's slide deck in PDF format and some additional materials are available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the help widget, which is marked with a question mark icon. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 hour after the webcast and can be accessed using the same link that was sent to you earlier. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jimmy and Richard.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. Let's get started. I'm Jimmy LeFever, Research Director with PayStream Advisors. I'm joined today by Richard Waugh. He is the VP of Corporate Development for Invocus. Richard, welcome.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Pleasure being with you today.
And we're happy to have you, Richard. For those of you who haven't heard of PayStream Advisors, we are an industry analyst and advisory services firm. We specialize in finance and procurement solutions. So we provide free research, tools, and publications on our website, such as our Navigator reports and our Perfect Match AP tool. We also provide advisory services to organizations looking to choose the best software and solutions for their organization. And we help them identify the right candidates, assist with RFPs, and ultimately select the best solution. Most importantly, all of our research reports are available for free download at www.paystreamadvisors.com. So, like I said, I'm joined by Richard with Invocus. He's going to tell us a little bit more about Invocus. Richard?
Thanks very much, Jimmy. A little bit of background and context on Invocus. Invocus provides a portal-based and touchless e-invoicing suite of tools for electronic invoicing as well as full AP automation. So that means a self-service portal interface for your suppliers to originate electronic invoices and track their approval and payment status. For the AP organization, automated invoice matching and workflow resolution of any exceptions, and the ability to capture and optimize early pay discounts as well. Invocus happens to be a division of Zycus. Zycus provides a full source-to-pay suite of procurement tools and was recognized in Gartner's 2015 Magic Quadrant as a leader in that space. Just provide a little bit more of the specifics around the solution components of this suite. Really, if we look at the supplier network, that's the supplier-facing aspect of the portal, so it's accessible by suppliers on a self-service basis with no fees to participate. And once there, the suppliers have the ability to initiate electronic invoices using a variety of formats and really engaging through this portal interface at whatever their technological level of capability happens to be. So that means from the largest, most sophisticated suppliers to some of the smaller or mid-sized businesses with less sophisticated technology on their side. Once at the portal, they can initiate those e-invoice transactions, collaborate electronically with the buying organization, with the AP group, and track the invoice approval and payment status. For the AP function, those invoices now originating as digital invoices can be matched on an automated basis. That's the three-way match with the PO and goods receipt, with the automated approval workflow routing, handling any exceptions to be resolved, and ultimately paid of those approved invoices getting paid through the accounts payable interface in their ERP system, with full reporting and tracking capability on the buying organization side as well. So that, in a nutshell, is the the underpinning of this suite of tools for invoice automation and AP automation.
So this is today's agenda. First, we're going to take a look at our survey research. This research comes from PayStream surveying thousands of finance and procurement professionals every year. We do this to get a great picture of the P2P market today, and we've done it for the last 15 or so years, so we can look at things longitudinally as well. Then we're going to take a look at making the business case for e-invoicing and how to anticipate and manage a new implementation. Part of the success there is going to be is really going to depend on building an effective way of onboarding suppliers as well as internal parties. Finally, we're going to take a look at an Invocus case study, and then we'll have time to get to you guys' questions. So let's get started. So before anything else, what we're going to be talking about today is electronic invoicing. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what an electronic invoice is. So an electronic invoice is an invoice that requires no data entry. So this can be via EDI or XML or through a supplier portal where the supplier uploads an invoice that has standardized fields. So either way, it requires no data entry on behalf of the buyer. So this would not be invoices that are mailed, obviously, and it's not going to be invoices that are emailed. So we asked hundreds of buying organizations what % of their suppliers send electronic invoices. And the large majority of them reported that less than 10% of suppliers were able to send invoices electronically. So I'd like to take a break here and poll our live audience. Let's see how these numbers compare with your organization. So we want to know what percentage of your total invoices are received as e-invoices. So is it less than 5%, 5 to 10%, 10 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60? Are you actually receiving more than 60% of your invoices electronically? I'll give you a couple minutes to answer the question. All right, well, thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your feedback. Looks like we've got a little bit of everybody. Richard, how do these numbers compare with what you guys see in the market?
Jimmy, I do think it's pretty typical of what we encounter on a regular basis in that, for the most part, very few organizations have reached that pinnacle where they're receiving, let's say, more than half even of their invoices electronically. So for the most part, there's lots of upside in terms of the opportunity that the typical organization today will be getting, in fact, the minority of their invoices currently electronically. But the fact that there are some that are achieving significant penetration and adoption really shows that it's possible to achieve those kinds of goals. So I think encouraging as well.
That's right, Richard. And, you know, the real value here lies in not just a more efficient process, but there's also an increased ability to capture early payment discounts. So we asked the same survey group how often their organization was able to capture discounts, and only about 34% of them said they were able to consistently do so. So we know the solution to capturing more discounts is a more efficient process, but specifically, what were some of the causes of these late payments or missed discounts? Most organizations reported that lengthy approval cycles and the manual routing of invoices were the culprit. Occasionally, it was put back on the suppliers with missing invoice information or sometimes lost invoices. Richard, what do you commonly see as the greatest drivers for e-invoicing implementation?
I think it really does map very nicely to the results from this survey, in that the core value proposition is around gaining that efficiency. Most organizations are looking at invoice approval cycles on average of longer than 20 days and many as long as 45 days. So that really means that there's a lot of of missed opportunities. The longer those cycles take, the more time-consuming it is, so the more staff they have to allocate to this process. And the other impact is the inability to capture those early pay discounts, as you mentioned. So if typical prompt pay discount terms are something like 2% 10, those elongated invoice approval cycles of 20, 30, 40 days or more really preclude that organization from being able to capture that savings opportunity in the form of early pay discounts.
That's right, Richard. And speaking of suppliers, we also asked finance and procurement professionals what were some of the challenges they faced in migrating from a manual paper-based solution to an electronic one. Not surprisingly, integrating with supplier systems and gaining supplier adoption were high on the list. And those are two of the themes that we're going to focus on today with Invocus, and that's choosing a solution that fully integrates with multiple systems, as well as offers a robust supplier onboarding solution. And in doing so, it can really be the difference between success or mediocrity. So here are the benefits survey respondents received from implementing an automated solution. 54% reported a reduction in costs, 31% reported fewer missing invoices or quicker approval cycles, and overall there was better visibility and, like we were discussing, the ability to capture more discounts. Richard, what are some of the successes that you've seen post-implementation with Invocus?
Yeah, Jimmy, it's interesting because the benefits really accrue across all of these categories listed here from the survey results, whether it's reducing the labor, the FTE costs from an AP standpoint, and I'll share some of these in a case study a little bit later, but better than 80%, or accelerating the overall invoice approval cycle on the order of 40% time reduction, that leads to not only better on-time payments, but more accurate payments, so reducing the potential for overpayments or duplicate payments as well, which represents a real cost savings. And by accelerating that overall approval cycle for the invoice process, really being able to capture discounts. So in the case that I'll review a little bit later, about 1% savings attributed to being able to capture cash discounts more effectively.
Thanks, Richard. So once you've garnered enough interest, it's time to get buy-in. It's time to manage the change that is likely coming. You really want to identify who the stakeholders are, who's going to drive the bus from both an AP standpoint as well as the C-suite, maybe even IT or procurement. You want to clearly define a project timeline, estimated cost, detail the scope of the solutions you're considering. You also want to look at the opportunity cost of not implementing a solution, and we're going to look at that in the next slide. So you want to identify the perceived risk as well as whose role will need to change, who will need to be reassigned to other tasks, and who's going to need new training.
So what we're really getting at here is what you see at the top, building a business case for stakeholders. Maybe the overall high-level benefits aren't enough for your CFO or your VP of Finance, but these numbers that you see can really help. This graph shows what we find for novice, mainstream, and innovative organizations. So novice, these are organizations that are fully manual, paper-based AP shops. So they may receive some invoices as emails, but most are paper, and little to none are electronic. Mainstream organizations generally have some form of automation. Maybe it's a scan and capture solution that they implemented years ago. This would be something that reads paper and email invoices and converts them into a verifiable electronic format, so still not fully touchless. Innovative organizations, they generally have some form of straight-through or touchless processing. When I say touchless, I mean the invoices get entered electronically, just as we discussed at the beginning, without any data entry. So when we look at the processing times and costs from novice to innovator, let's take a look at this. So there's a difference of 40 days in approval cycle. Invoices are approved 40 days faster from innovators rather than novices. And then the overall processing cost per invoices also goes from $15 with novices to just over $2 with innovators. So what's more, innovators organizations are able to capture up to 75% or more of discounts. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard now, and he's going to tell us more about the Invocus strategy and solution. Richard?
Thanks, Jimmy. I wanted to spend just a minute kind of defining what constitutes the e-invoicing supplier portal, both from the supplier vantage point and the buyer vantage point. And, I think one of the things that's important to understand how the technology has evolved, how flexible it is, and I'm reminded that we covered in an earlier slide some survey results that showed that the top challenge, at least perceived challenge, with an e-invoicing initiative is integration both to buyer and supplier systems. So I wouldn't dispute that. After all, perception is reality. But I think one of the objectives here is to provide a little bit more education around the flexibility in the technology, because in fact the technology and integration of technology should not be the biggest barrier. It actually provides a number of different options for buyers and suppliers to engage effectively. And starting on the supplier side of this, it's all about allowing suppliers to engage with the AP group, with the buying organization, through whatever means they're most comfortable with from a technological standpoint. So that means the most sophisticated suppliers will be able to use their incumbent e-commerce infrastructure and systems that they already have implemented using tools like XML or EDI. But those suppliers that haven't made those investments in e-commerce will be able to engage very effectively simply by having browser accessibility to a portal interface. So at the portal, they're going to be able to flip a PO into an electronic invoice. They can even interact with the portal through a mobile app or through their mobile device, and using tools built into the cloud, such as OCR, which is optical character recognition, doing something as simple as uploading an image from a PDF or clicking a snap of that through their phone and uploading that image and having it automatically scanned and transferred into a digital invoice. At the lowest common denominator, if you will, there are tools here that simply allow suppliers to respond to an email to validate and submit an electronic invoice back to the buying organization. So going forward, with so many different options available to suppliers, the technology in and of itself and the ability to interface and integrate on the supplier side with their systems and capabilities, as well as back on the buying organization side, should no longer be the barrier to entry. The other thing that's key for suppliers is that they're in control. So with this portal interface at their access with simply a self-service login and registration, they can maintain their own information. They can upload things like W-9s or certificates of insurance that make sure that they're a valid supplier, active in the vendor master and available for invoice payment. And all along the way, they have full visibility to track their invoice status. So has the invoice been received? Is it in the approval cycle? Is it scheduled for remittance? And if so, what's the check date or check number when they can expect payment and plan their working capital needs accordingly? So that really addresses, Jimmy, one of the key frustration points for many AP organizations is they spend a disproportionate amount of their time having to field inquiry calls coming in from suppliers who obviously want to know, when am I going to get paid? Where is my invoice in the approval cycle? So with the an e-invoicing supplier portal such as this one, you're really putting control in the hands of the suppliers to manage their information on your behalf and to keep up to date with their own status tracking capability, not having to distract the AP group with these calls about trying to find out when they're going to get paid. And on the other end of this two-way collaboration on the buying organization side, the AP group, those invoices that are received on a digital basis are going to be more timely. They're received faster. Not only that, they're much more likely to be accurate, therefore leading to a first-pass match with the PO and the goods receipt. So having a much higher percentage of invoices that flow through on the first pass as a touchless matched invoice means AP staff can spend more time on higher value-added activities, especially resolving exceptions. So those exceptions will invariably happen, even if we've significantly reduced the volume of an incidence of a mismatch. But the tools then are going to enable an automated workflow approval process to effectively resolve those mismatches. So building the intelligence into the system to know where to route that invoice to the requester, to the cost center or budget holder to get the proper approvals, and then be able to interface those approved invoices back to the ERP system, the AP module in ERP, to actually create the remittance to the vendors. And along the way, this is going to enable the AP group to do a much better job of managing working capital, so either optimizing days payable outstanding or selectively deciding to capture early pay discounts to reduce the actual spend cost reduction that's accomplished in that case in exchange for being able to provide their suppliers with earlier payment and better working capital position. So that's really what the supplier portal is about, creating that collaboration and that interface between the AP groups and their supply base. Now, making an effective e-invoicing supplier portal, building it and make sure that they come versus just building it and hoping they will come, means impacting and implementing an effective onboarding strategy. So that starts with the idea that you want to onboard aggressively and really understand if that's a core competence for your organization or if that's something that your solution provider can bring to the table. After all, they will have onboarded multiple suppliers. Perhaps that supplier is already in that network, and they have the expertise in really understanding what that supplier's comfort level is, if you will, with technology and where best to provide that point of entry to them. Is it through the portal? Is it a direct machine-to-machine integration with their e-commerce systems using a standard protocol such as XML or EDI? It's really finding that best fit with the supplier. So a best practice in this space has really been to look to a solution provider that has a core competence and expertise in supplier enablement and onboarding. The next step is to onboard not only aggressively but strategically. So this is really about segmenting the supply base. First of all, to get the biggest bang for the buck, really identify those suppliers that are generating the highest volume of transactions, to prioritize them to get onboarded with your e-invoicing program to return the biggest benefits the fastest. So it's not just the largest suppliers from a spend volume standpoint or aggregate spend value, but which suppliers are generating the highest volume of transactions, because that's what's creating the bottleneck in the process. So freeing that up will provide myriad benefits down the road. And it's all about meeting the suppliers where they are. Not only that, providing a compelling value proposition to the suppliers. So I'll talk a little bit later about how to position both carrots and sticks, incentives, and a little bit of a stronger behavior reinforcement mechanism in the form of those sticks, and making sure that you don't erect any barriers to entry on the supplier side. So, for instance, one of the most frequently cited challenges on the supplier side is actually incurring fees, transaction or network fees, to participate in an invoicing program. So one of the approaches would be to make sure that there aren't any fees imposed on the suppliers that would inhibit their participation in any way. And ultimately, it's about offering long-term value. So there's benefit to the AP organization, to the buying group, to gain those efficiencies, but stressing in that value proposition and the outreach to the supply base that there is in fact a value proposition to them as well, that they'll gain efficiencies on their side. Not only that, they can improve their working capital visibility and working capital management much more effectively, making you a customer of choice for that supplier. Here I wanted to talk just in a little bit more detail about an effective segmentation strategy, because that's so key to achieving the supplier enablement and onboarding goals. And really looking at the supply base across three key tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So in Tier 1, these are going to be typically your largest suppliers that are very sophisticated technically, that already have e-commerce capability. And quite frankly, this would be the lowest hanging fruit to go after. Because they're very sophisticated from a technology standpoint, they're going to be those suppliers that can be onboarded most quickly in all likelihood. Not only that, they're probably going to represent a disproportionate share of the overall invoice volume. So for the most part, these will be larger suppliers that have the wherewithal to invest in e-commerce that also represent a bigger chunk of your business overall. The good news, too, at the Tier 1, this is a machine-based e-invoicing protocol, so a direct integration between the buying organization, the AP functions, systems, and that supplier's billing systems on their side. So this is going to be the lowest cost and most accurate option available for all parties, because there is no manual data entry on either side of the equation for the supplier or the buying organization. The next level is a critical level when you look at Tier 2, because it represents that significant portion of the supply base, a very large number of suppliers, which today are sending paper invoices or email attachments, which might as well be paper because they have to be opened and key punched by the AP group. This is the real opportunity to migrate those mid-sized suppliers, some smaller suppliers, up the curve to start beginning to utilize the portal-based solutions, such that when all they have at their disposal is browser connection to the internet, they can be fully electronically compliant in submitting transactions to you. So no cost to the buyer, of course, no entry fees to the supplier either. Some manual data entry could be required depending on the way in which they interface, but it's going to drive much greater efficiency than the traditional paper-based processes, which are typical at the lowest tier. So Tier 3 should really be, over time, those smaller vendors with smaller transaction volumes that represent the tail spend. And today, that may mean digitizing those paper invoices through a scanning process using a technology such as optical character recognition. But of course, this is going to introduce more inefficiency and more cost to the buying organization to have to scan and read and validate and verify those documents. So over time, the strategy will be within this Tier 3 to continue to migrate those suppliers up into the portal or ultimately into a full machine-to-machine transaction at Tier 1 and really eliminate the paper from the process over time.
Well, thanks, Richard. You know, the strategy that Richard is discussing is precisely what PayStream recommends as well. So capture that low-hanging fruit with e-invoicing, implementing a supplier portal to capture the second tier of suppliers, and finally implementing an OCR tool to get the suppliers that are still sluggish. So it's time for our next poll question. We want to know, of those of you that have an e-invoicing solution, what's your strategy for getting suppliers to adopt? Is it the big stick approach, making it mandatory to comply? Do you give them the option to opt in? Is it a combination of carrots and sticks, you know, showing them the advantages or maybe extending payment terms? Or do you have a build it and hope they come approach? So go ahead and make your selection there. I'll give you a couple seconds. All right, thank you so much for your participation. So again, it looks like we've got a little bit of everyone in the audience today. Richard, do you want to talk a little bit more about what Invocus recommends here?
Yeah, Jimmy, you know, I think it's interesting that you know, there's a few cases where organizations may opt for that big stick approach, really making it compulsory to participate, and in some cases making it purely voluntary, so say the opt-in approach. But we really find that the most typical scenario is some hybrid between the two. The fact that, you know, across your supply base you may not have enough buying leverage, enough volume with all the different suppliers across different categories to effectively wield that big stick in every case. Likewise, something that's completely voluntary without a strong message of endorsement from the AP team and the buying group is much less likely to achieve the desired result. So we really see that the best practice approach is to blend the two. It's that carrots and sticks applied equally for the most part that's going to produce the greatest adoption and the most traction, and certainly the last one, just build it and hope they come. Well, hope is not a strategy, so we don't recommend that one. But since we do see an effective blending of carrots and sticks as the best practice, as the most effective approach, wanted to spend a few minutes kind of sharing some of those tools and techniques for both carrots and sticks to help organizations plan and execute their program as effectively as possible. So when we look first at formulating that value proposition for your suppliers, it's always nice to start with the carrot first. What's in it for them? And one of the first things I'd like to stress is to take off the table any barriers to entry for the supplier. So that means making clear that there will be no fees of any kind to the supplier to participate. That's going to immediately reduce some of the objection or potential reticence on behalf of the suppliers. But then it's important to say not only is it not going to cost you anything, but it's going to deliver benefits to you as well. So one of the first benefits is the fact that you're not asking the supplier to invest in or deploy any technology they don't already have at their disposal. So if they have invested in technology such as e-commerce, you're allowing them to leverage that IT infrastructure. Because this is deployed in the cloud, this portal, you're not asking that supplier organization to deploy any IT resources to support this effort. So it's going to be very easy for them to comply and utilize whatever technology they happen to have at their disposal. In addition to that, there are going to be cost savings that will accrue to the suppliers as well. So it costs them money to have to go through a paper or manual process, simply mailing or faxing, and the handling and time it takes for them to generate and deliver those invoices to you will be streamlined significantly by giving them the means to digitize their invoice from the outset. And not only that, there's an inherent latency in those traditional manual processes with the wait and the touch time involved in mailing, someone having to open and route those invoices and the data entry that goes on. So typically, this can consume up to 7 days in the overall invoice cycle that can be eliminated with an electronic submission of the invoice from the outset. Because those digital invoices are coming in more quickly and they're also being submitted more accurately using techniques such as a flip of a PO to an invoice directly, so there's no potential for manual data entry errors in that process, it means that their invoice is going to be matched more often on the first pass, an automated match, which is going to mean they're much more likely to get paid on time within terms, which of course, as we know, is so critical to suppliers. Not only that, it's not only a matter of getting paid on time, it can increase the potential for those suppliers to avail themselves of dynamic discounting opportunities or prompt payment discounts to improve their own working capital position. Offers a benefit to their customer, to the buying organization, to reduce their costs, and it's a benefit to the suppliers themselves to improve working capital and cash flow. The other big benefit not to be overlooked here is putting control in the supplier's hands to be able to track their own invoice and payment status. So just as frustrating as it is to the AP groups to have to field those inquiry calls coming in from suppliers, it's equally frustrating to the suppliers not to have visibility, not to be able to plan for their working capital needs, and having to place those calls to follow up and track their invoice status. So taken as a whole, lots of carrots, a compelling value proposition that can help encourage the suppliers to participate. Now recognize, too, that some suppliers may need a little bit more prodding. So that's where the sticks come in handy as well. And there are a variety of techniques that we've seen customers use to really encourage, to positively reinforce the behavior they want by wielding the stick that they feel is appropriate for them and the type of relationship they want to establish with their supply base. So on one end, that means a very firm stance, so making supplier participation mandatory, not usually immediately, but that may mean setting a date in the future, a fixed date, where it's clear to the suppliers that this is a condition of doing business, that they will be expected to adopt this technology to comply if they want to remain a preferred vendor or an active supplier to your organization. So that's certainly a pretty aggressive stance. Other sticks that have been implemented, not quite as definitive, but often equally effective, is really changing the nature of the supplier relationship up front in the negotiation process. So if you're going through an RFP, for example, or actually putting in place a contract, making participation in an e-invoicing program a condition of doing business, not retroactively, but right from day one in determining which suppliers you're going to contract with and which ones are going to meet your test, making that a condition of compliance for doing business together. A little bit less directive, but also effective oftentimes, is the idea that while it may not be an absolute requirement as part of the business relationship, it will advantage those suppliers and by definition disadvantage those suppliers that don't actually participate when you make clear to those suppliers that their ability to collaborate with you electronically will be one of those key performance indicators that gets measured in your overall scorecard of supplier performance, along with a variety of other factors that may include quality, delivery, cost, on-time performance. But this is yet another key performance indicator that will help those suppliers that take the necessary steps to adopt this program, will help them to perform better in the overall rating. Some of the other sticks that can be wielded here is actually to also make clear that only those suppliers that are participants in the e-invoicing portal program are going to be eligible for flexible financing, such as the prompt pay or dynamic discounting payments. Beyond that, it can also be determined that the buying organization, the AP group, may adopt variable payment terms depending on the supplier's willingness to participate. So, for example, if standard payment terms are 30 days, but the supplier flatly refuses to participate in the portal program, for those suppliers, you may make a decision to extend those payment terms to 45, 60 days as a clear disincentive for them not being willing to participate. And in addition, obviously only those suppliers that are registered and interacting through your portal will have that self-service visibility to track their own invoice and payment status and have that full accountability and reporting on their side. So it is typically a blend of some of these sticks along with the carrots that provide the incentive for suppliers to adopt your program, to onboard quickly and begin getting the full benefits of the solution. So finally today I wanted to walk through a case study, an actual customer case study of how the e-invoicing program has been implemented, how it helped them overcome a series of challenges in their existing AP process and some of the benefits that have been derived. So in this particular case, the company happens to be in the financial services sector, a private insurer, and when we look at the as-is process, what the need was, this is probably a pretty typical scenario for a lot of organizations in that today they may be using their ERP, in this case it happened to be SAP, for invoice processing and payments, but because they haven't captured any meaningful percentage of their invoices electronically, it's still mainly a manual paper-bound process, which meant for this insurance company that their AP team was allocating a disproportionate amount of their time to extensive manual data entry to process invoices. Not only that, the first step in the AP process before you can pay an invoice is to get a supplier onboarded. And they found that their supplier onboarding process was very ad hoc and inconsistent, and they were not able to capture consistently complete and detailed information about the suppliers themselves, meaning that in their supplier master there was no single version of truth to really understand who the supplier is and make sure that they were up to date on all the documentation that they needed to be able to carry on that business relationship and complete the invoice approval and payment cycle. So clearly, a lot of underlying challenges that meant that they had to look for a solution to improve those results significantly. So in their case, they went to market to look for a solution in the typical and traditional manner that most organizations go through, a comprehensive RFI and RFP where they're going to look at leading players in the market. And in this case, after a thorough and rigorous evaluation, they did select the Invocus supplier portal solution and also implemented that supplier segmentation strategy that we've talked about, really focusing on the top 500 suppliers for an initial onboarding program. And they did opt or really defer more towards the stick type approach, I guess, if you had to summarize it, by communicating to the suppliers this would be a mandatory program that requires their participation. And I would say, in combination with delivering the message that this would be expected, in fact required, of the suppliers to participate, nevertheless they did support that message with a number of the carrots as well. So a variety of email messaging, webinar or website information and announcements that stress not only the fact that it's a mandatory program, but that there are numerous benefits to be had for the suppliers, and in fact significant support provided as part of the solution implementation to help them through the onboarding and adoption process. So a little bit of a blending of the carrot and stick, but still a very strong message that the suppliers will be required to participate in the program. And then to summarize some of the results, highly successful across a number of different key metrics when we look at the benefits realized here. So very significant cost savings attributed to the overall efficiency gain. So by taking 1/3 of the cycle time off the overall invoice approval process, that meant that this insurance company could actually garner significant cash discounts where they hadn't been able to avail themselves previously. So in their case, 1% savings through early pay discounts on fully 1/3 of their total spend volume. The efficiencies dramatically reduced their overall labor cost as well. So 87% time savings in their vendor management staff by really providing the access to the suppliers themselves. So because suppliers can come in through a self-service portal to not only register themselves and get onboarded, but also to track their own invoice and payment status, that dramatically reduced the time, this 87%, that the vendor management AP staff had to spend supporting the supplier onboarding and dealing with inquiries so that they can be more strategic and more proactive in how they spend their time. Another big time savings was in the actual invoice matching and approval process itself. So they've calculated a 40% time savings within the AP function because more and more of their invoices are automatically matched, and the fact is therefore they're dealing only with exceptions and resolving those exceptions. The efficiency gains also meant more accurate payments. So a reduction of overpayments and duplicate payments alone netted over $100,000 in savings just by paying the right amount instead of paying too much or paying twice. The benefits of AP automation had a ripple effect into the procurement and sourcing team. So having now detailed line item level spend data accurately coded and classified has meant that the procurement team could do a much more effective job with understanding where the leverage exists and devising and executing strategic sourcing approaches at a category-specific and supplier-specific level. And overall, the buying organization found that their internal customer satisfaction was enhanced significantly. So whereas taking a metric like a net promoter score that previously had been effectively neutral, they increased that net promoter score by 10 points, so moving it into the positive territory, really enhancing the overall image of the accounts payable and buying function for this insurance company. So dramatic results in a relatively short period of time, and ongoing benefits forecasted as more and more suppliers, including the long tail of suppliers, are brought into this program so that the benefits become enhanced and extrapolated across total spend volume and across the full supply base for this particular company.
All right. Well, thanks, Richard. It's time to get some of you guys' questions. Thanks for being so patient. We've saved all the questions for the end. We've got a list here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First question is from Blair. He wants to know, how long does it take to implement an e-invoicing supplier portal? Well, I would say, Blair, that really depends on the size of your company, but I think what you mean is with Invocus. Richard, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure, and you're right, Jimmy, to some extent. It always does depend, as the answer goes. But I think as we've stressed in today's webcast, the best practice approach is to prioritize and segment the supply base and go through a phased implementation. So I would stress that to take that phased approach, to prioritize those suppliers in that first phase that are generating the highest volume of invoices, and to break it into very manageable chunks. So that first phase deployment might be 90 to 120 days, so very rapid, to have the solution implemented, integrated to your ERP systems on the AP organization side, to have the supplier enablement and integration based on whatever interface they're comfortable with, either through the portal or through their own e-commerce systems. But to be able to get up and running very quickly in that first 90 to 120 days, show benefits very quickly, to make this, therefore, a self-funding program, and identify subsequent phases or waves of onboarding along the same type of increments every 90 or 120 days or so. Plan a phase for rollout so that you're timing the inflow of benefits to the outflow of costs.
Thanks, Blair. Next question is from Zach. He wants to know, does Invocus need to integrate with my ERP system?
Yes, Invocus would absolutely integrate with the AP organization, the buying group's ERP system, at the final step of this process. So within the Invocus environment, we're utilizing that portal interface to acquire and have suppliers originate e-invoices or digital invoices through the network, receiving those invoices, then applying various business rules and constraints to enable an automated three-way or two-way match of the invoice to the PO and or goods receipt, as well as the approval workflow process, all of which culminates in having an okay-to-pay file, essentially vouchered invoices, ready to be submitted to the AP module in the ERP system to actually create the payment. So that's where those banking interfaces reside. So only that final step would occur through that integration, which would typically be a mandatory part of the implementation program, is to actually have that interface to the remittance system, as well as information flowing back from the ERP system on check status, so that it's now visible in the portal for the suppliers to be able to track that on a self-service basis.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach, for your question. Next question is from Martha. She says, how does this technology change AP's role? Richard, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's really a compelling question that Martha has there, because it does have very significant implications. If AP can spend less time on manual data entry type of tasks, or not have to enter all the data to register suppliers, if suppliers can do that themselves through the portal, it really changes the nature of the work for AP. And I think this is what's so compelling and exciting about the opportunity here, is changing the paradigm from manual data entry to being more strategic and having an opportunity to drive much greater contribution and value to the business overall. So that means spending more time focusing on working capital management, how best to leverage that cash position and optimizing days payable outstanding, or targeting selectively opportunities for early pay discounts, for example. Really being able to engage through a collaboration with those suppliers on a much more strategic level that pays dividends to the business and which will be recognized by the CFO, the treasurer, in providing that contribution to working capital management, just as well as providing much better strategic insights, especially to the procurement team, by providing quality data on exactly what's being purchased at a very granular line item level to make better strategic sourcing decisions as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Martha, for your question, and thanks, Richard, for the response. So the next question is from Liz. Liz wants to know, how do I create a business case for investing in e-invoicing?
Yeah, good question there as well, and I think that the idea, the strategy here is to make sure that it's comprehensive analysis of all the benefits, both the tangible hard dollar cost savings as well as what may be perceived as some of the softer benefits or intangible process efficiencies, but put all of those on the table. And that means looking at, because you've reduced the overall cycle time, being able to dramatically improve your ability to capture prompt payment discounts. So I know earlier on, Jimmy, we had a slide that talked about building the business case, and that on average, typically organizations are only capturing 40% today of the available prompt payment discounts. So that means what's already contractually negotiated payment terms, for example, 2% 10, net 30 as standard terms. Today, the typical organization is only able to capture 40% of what's on the table. So just looking at the business case from an incremental standpoint, what would it mean if you could capture that additional 60% of available prompt payment discounts as an example? In addition to that, look at what the process efficiencies are in terms of reducing the cost per transaction, such as the cost per invoice, where we showed data again earlier where the best practice, the innovative companies are reducing that to only a few dollars, for example, per invoice versus the typical performance being several times that much. So extrapolate that over the annual invoice volume, which could well be thousands, if not tens of thousands of invoice, and saving several dollars or more on a per transaction basis becomes very significant in terms of the potential benefit to the organization. So it's really about putting together a business case that's predicated on driving cost reduction by capturing payment discounts. It may be, if the strategy is actually to optimize days payable outstanding, of what is the net present value of being able to hold onto that cash longer, as well as really being able to quantify the process efficiencies to be gained by converting from a paper-bound process to an automated electronic process.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Liz, for your question. It looks like that's all the questions we have time for today, but you can still put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get back to you via email promptly. For those of us that are viewing this on demand, we'll leave the thank you screen up for a couple minutes so you have time to type your question in. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jimmy. My pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone.